Hello everyone and welcome to August's Wheel of D20 vlog. So I actually realized the second day into August that I forgot to start this vlog because I was doing two other vlogs over the course of this week already, but I have got through 70% of Black Girls Must Die Exhausted by Jayne Allen. This is the first book of my Wheel of D20 books I am reading right now. This one is to read a book that is under 500 pages and was a prompt from the TBR game I was told by the Wheel to play, which was Stephanie's Bookverse's Star Hop TBR game. Go check out the TBR video if you would like to see kind of what happened. I didn't unfortunately get all the footage that I wanted to on that TBR, but at least you'll hear kind of how things are going because there's new stuff with the Wheel of D20 going on starting this month. This is an adult contemporary that focuses on a 30-something mixed woman who is a journalist in the Los Angeles area that is dealing with infertility issues, essentially. She kind of has been this person that has been very, career driven, has been really wanting to make a name for herself in journalism, and is really trying to vie for this promotion at work. But in the course of all of that, with all the stress that she has dealt with over the last handful of years, she realizes that the amount of eggs that she actually has in her ovaries is dwindling very rapidly. And she's about 6 months before she will no longer be able to bear children. And that's a very scary thought for her because Tabitha, our main character, is somebody who actually did want to have children, but she was really focused on her career firstly and most importantly, and so this is a very scary thing for her. On top of that, you learn that she's a lot of family dynamic problems in terms of the fact that she comes from a broken home, she is in a relationship that is not really seeming to go anywhere, and she also has a couple of friends that seem to have their own issues that she's kind of having to deal with because of the fact that it's a very close-knit group and a lot of people are involved in the kinds of things that are going on with all of them. But there's a lot of things that are happening for poor Tabitha that seem to be non-ending, and that is causing a lot of stress, which is then perpetuating this infertility issue. And so Tabitha has to basically decide what she wants to do, if she is going to freeze her eggs, which basically would cause her to then have eggs to have children later on in the future, but it is in a very expensive process. If you've ever done any research on it, it costs thousands upon thousands of dollars for even just one round of freezing eggs, let alone having to go through possibly multiple rounds. And on top of that, trying to get her life sorted out and figure out what is it that Tabitha really wants with the rest of her life now into her 30s. And so this is a really hard-hitting story. Again, like I said, I'm like 70% of the way through it. This is all I have left right here from the bookmark over. And I have found myself so much crying at this, not because of anything that I can necessarily fully relate to other than some of the anxiety that is kind of being represented here in terms of like everything feeling like it's falling on top of you and you not really being able to feel like you're floating and more so that you're drowning under everything. But the specifics of what are causing her anxiety, I don't really have any standing on in terms of relating to because I've never, been in her position. And one thing that I mentioned in my weekly reading vlog that I was doing over the course of this week while reading this is talking about the amount of talk that there is about being a Black woman in society, especially in this current time, because there's a lot of talk about, especially in places like the workforce and even so much in daily life, that is really, really difficult to sift through. And so there's a lot to be learned by this. I would definitely recommend this to people who are looking to understand a little bit more about specifically a woman of color's issues that are going on day to day, the kinds of things that are experienced just by being a woman in general, but then also being of color, and the kind of multi-layered issues that are involved with all of that in terms of working in the workforce where you have a company who is looking to diversify, but what are they really doing to diversify? And is it that they are giving people certain positions because of their race or based purely on merit? And then there's also the idea of, trying to not be super aggressive as a woman, but then also the multi-layered facet of being a Black woman and the issues of being seen as aggressive or then also on the flip side as complacent and the problems surrounding around that and various other things in terms of being a Black woman. Now, keeping in mind the main character is mixed, we do have some family heritage that is explained in this story where her grandmother Tabitha's grandmother, also named Tabitha, is a white woman who then had married a black man in a time where interracial marriages and couplings were not really looked well upon. So there is some dichotomy that is brought up with Tabitha and a beautiful conversation about the fact that while Grandma Tabitha doesn't really fully understand all the complexities of being a black person, she understands that her granddaughter is hurting, and that's like a really important aspect. And so it's a lot about family. There's also, like I said, a lot about family involved in this, where Tabitha's from a broken home and dealing with a lot of that stuff. On top of that, you have her friends Lexi and Laila, who are going through their own issues, and Tabitha's kind of not really in the middle of all of it, but because she's so involved with her friends and so very intertwined with their lives, that it kind of puts her in the middle of a lot of this, or at the very least, you know, she's kind of in that position where she can't just ignore all the things that are going on, and so she feels like she either has to do something about it, or has to at least be that emotional support for her friends, when she is struggling probably 10 times as badly as the two of them with respect to their own situation, because the both of them do have their own situations that they are dealing with that are also very hurtful and traumatizing and very anger-inducing and upsetting, but they're not really taking into full account the things that Tabitha is going through. Tabitha is definitely putting herself last compared to everybody around her, including her friends. And so there's another conversation kind of dealing with that. And so this is a very multi-layered story that I have grown to just basically from the get-go fall in love with. There is a scene at the very beginning of this where Tabitha is pulled aside by a white officer, and it was a little scary at first because of the fact of the conversation that had gone on about being a black person being pulled over by a white officer, and the police brutality things that have been going on in, you know, since forever, basically, it seems like, and the anxiety that puts on a black person or any person of color, and it was a really, really scary thing because of the fact that I've read other books that talk about police brutality where those scenes have not ended well, and so it's a little scary to read from. But what I really appreciate is that this book really, I think, paints a very good perspective for me to understand some more of the issues and have a little bit of a deeper understanding of the issues that I spoke on earlier, that I, as a white woman that is not in any way familiar with these situations, can understand to the point where I can maybe empathize and feel for somebody, not necessarily know exactly what they're going through, but at least be able to understand that there's hurt, that this person is hurt, they're not okay, and they require some kind of emotional support. Like, I honestly wish I could give Tabitha like the biggest hug, just purely because the poor woman needs a hug. Like, she is going through so much that I can't even imagine getting through myself. I already have like very anxious times in my life where I feel like everything is, you know, falling around me and that I'm drowning under all these things. I feel like basically I don't know why this woman is still standing, because of the fact that all these things feel like they would have just knocked her down completely already, and somehow she's still resilient enough to keep going, and I applaud her so much for that, because God knows I would be struggling if I was in her position, and I feel so much for her. But I'm so proud of her too for staying resilient, because there are not many people in her position, I think, that would fare like that. So like I said, I would definitely recommend this to any of my white ally friends who are looking to understand a little bit more about some of the issues within a certain context, but still issues nonetheless that we as white people need to be a little bit more aware of in terms of different things that black people go through, and other people of color to that extent as well, because while these are specifically more black-based issues, there are things that I think we can in some ways extend to other people of color as well. So really enjoying this. Not quite done with it as of yet, but I can already tell you this is going to be like a 5 out of 5 star for me because I just love this book so much. This definitely is something I will keep with me for a long time. I think I'm going to even possibly say that it would be a reread. Like, it's not very often anymore I find books that I want to reread as I'm reading them, and I already feel like I want to reread this over and over and over again and annotate it and mark up everything in this book because it's just so good. It's just one of those books where I think it's going to leave a lasting impression on me for the rest of this year. This very easily could crack my top 10 favorite books of the year. I don't know where exactly it would rank with everything else because I don't have that list in my head at this moment, but I can tell you this would be top 10. So very, very impressed with this. I went into this thinking I was going to end up crying, and I did multiple times already. I expect that the last quarter of this is going to keep me in that, especially with the ending. I have no idea whether it's going to be a fully happy ending or a really sad one. Either way, I feel like I'm gonna cry. So there's that. But that's it for my first read so far. I'll let you guys know when I get done with this and get started with my next read, which I think is gonna be A Court of Frost and Starlight, if I'm not mistaken. I have to look back at my notes in my journal. I think it's actually gonna be A Court of Frost and Starlight, which is gonna be really exciting because I can't wait for that book. It's gonna be so good. Good evening, everyone. It is going on 8 o'clock at night on Wednesday the 3rd, and I did just finish Black Rose Must Die Exhausted by Jayne Allen. This is the first book I will have completed for Wheel of D20, which is great. I have one book down, and this was to complete my prompt of a book that was under 500 pages, which was one of the prompts I pulled from Stephanie's Bookverse's Star Hop TBR game that I had to pull because of the fact that the wheel told me I had to play that for about 3 prompts. This one's done. 5 out of 5 stars like I thought I was gonna give it. Absolutely loved it. The ending was incredibly heartbreaking, but I'm very excited because I found out after finishing this that this is actually the first book in a trilogy, and I immediately want to get my hands on Black Girls Must Be Magic, which is the second book. The next book I'm going to read, that is my next Wheel of D20 book, is A Court of Frost and Starlight. I actually am reading this already for other things. This is a book I am reading for Princesses at Castle Library's read-along series that we are doing of the Court of Thorns and Roses series. The reason we're reading this is because her vow renewal that she is having in 2023 is themed around kind of the aesthetic and the vibe that there is with the Court of Thorns and Roses in general. And so in order to really understand what that series is, really read it in its entirety for the first time, she kind of decided just to host a read-along of this, and this is the August pick. So I'm actually on time with reading this series for the first time in a while, but I'm very excited to complete the prompt to read a book under 400 pages, which was again another prompt from Stephanie's Bookverse's Star Hop TBR game. I think I'm finally getting to the point where I can say that all in one breath without stumbling over my words, but we'll see how much more I can get through. I am reading this also though for a few other things, for the magical readathon that I'm participating in, and also another readathon, Witchathon, which there's more information about that in those vlogs, obviously, that you'll have seen already. But for this vlog specifically, that's kind of what I'm reading it for, is to complete that second of 3 prompts that I got from the Star Hop TBR game. So today, in order to reach my reading goal, have to read the first 29 pages, it looks like, of this, but I obviously could read more if I chose to, but I'm kind of just letting myself hit my goal and calling it good, and then that way I can move on to my back burner book that I'm working on, which is for my Finish Your DNF series, which is from Blood and Ash. So I'm gonna basically quickly run through the first 30 pages of this and then kind of feel how I'm doing. I'll update you guys tomorrow when I have made some significant progress in that with my thoughts, because I know this one's going to be really hard because of the fact that most people that I remember reading this when it first came out said it was really disappointing, and I don't know whether it's because of how short it is compared to the other books, or if it's because the content is not as great. I feel like it was kind of a mixed bag of things. So I'm excited to see my own thoughts on this, since it is part of the read-along I'm doing with Princess, like I said, so we'll see. But anyway, I will see all of you guys probably tomorrow. Hey guys, so hopefully you can hear me with the air conditioner going, but it's still super hot out here, so we need to keep the house cool. So anyway, earlier today I did finish A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J Maas. This was my second read for Wheel of D20 to read a book under 400 pages, I think it was. And also this counted for a lot of other stuff for the readathons I'm doing in this month, but I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I really did enjoy it from beginning to end, just about as much as I think I've loved any of the other books in this series. I do understand, though, why a lot of people feel like that this is not the best, because it's really short, there's not really a ton that happens in terms of plot, but really the story is more so looking at all of the characters and I think where they are after the events of A Court of Wings and Ruin, and more specifically I think some of the ramifications that have happened since the war. So first, like, you have Nesta, who's basically gone off on her own and she's kind of like drinking herself to death basically. You have Feyre and Rhysand, who are dealing with their own emotional problems separately and together because of the things that happened in the war, with the fact that Feyre learned a lot of very interesting things that happened in A Court of Wings and Ruin that are kind of like coming together in this one. And you have Elaine, who is still dealing with a lot of her emotional problems that she's had since, you know, Court of Wings and Ruin, since the beginning of that. And then also other characters, like you hear from Moore, who apparently has some really deep-seated issues that, like, I would never have guessed until reading this from her perspective. And also Cassian, who is like dealing with the fact of who he finds out his mate is in A Court of Wings and Ruin, and trying to deal with that and the issues that he has with himself because of how he's lived his life so far, and now including this mate who doesn't really seem to want him at all, is very frustrating. And so, like, you learn basically all of these characters, like what's happened to them since the war, and it's all spent around the winter solstice, I believe, because it has a very Christmassy kind of vibe. Like, the way I kept thinking about it was like, you know, that Beauty and the Beast Christmas special that they did like a long time ago? It reminded me a lot of that, vibes wise. I mean, which makes sense, because from what I understand, A Court of Thorns and Roses was supposed to be kind of a Beauty and the Beast retelling, so it makes sense that this is playing on those vibes, if you will. But more importantly, I think that this is basically supposed to be the bridge between the main trilogy and the new series that has started off with A Court of Silver Flames, because of the fact that, first of all, we get to see part of Nesta's perspective in this. We get to see some of the things that have been happening since the war, that I think that it's a perfect bridge to A Court of Silver Flames, which picks up entirely in Nesta's perspective, which I'm very excited for to get to when I get to read it in September, because I have heard from a lot of people that it has really changed their mind about Nesta as a person, as we learn a lot about how exactly she dealt with things over the course of the main series, which I know that she's not necessarily a redeemable character by any means. She did some really mean things to her sister that I would not, as a person, feel like should be forgiven. However, I am willing to understand maybe her perspective a little bit more, because you can always, like, learn what somebody has gone through and like the issues that they have because of it, and you can understand them as a person from that perspective, but there is no redeeming somebody that is as cruel and cold-hearted as Nesta. Like, it's like you can basically understand why your toxic spouse or friend or even sibling or other family member, like, you can understand why they are doing things the way they're doing it, but you still don't have to forgive them fully for anything that they've done. You don't. There's nothing saying that you have to forgive at all the person that is doing bad things to you just because you understand where they're coming from, because they still made choices to you know, do what they did. And I think that that's kind of been what Sarah has been leading up to with this series, especially with how Court of Frost and Starlight was touching on, is the fact that Nesta's got her own issues that we are going to be exploring a lot more, and I'm very excited to pick up A Court of Silver Flames. I'm already missing this world, like, immensely. Like, ever since having read A Court of Wings and Ruin, I've just wanted to reread that book over and over and over again, because, like, that book is the best out of that series, and it is, like, just so amazing from beginning to end. Like, I did not realize that this series would be one I would be so enamored with, and yet I'm so grateful that I started it this year, even though I'm so far behind, you know, everybody else in terms of their love for it. But I'm very excited to then see what the other 2 books in Nesta's series ends up being, because if things are going to go the way I think they're going to go, which is going to be, like I said, a lot of, you know, not necessarily fully redeeming Nesta, but learning a lot more about her, I would be also excited to see then if we get to see more from Elaine at some point, because I think that the way that Sarah wants to build this series, from what I can see, is learning about the sisters, who are a huge part of Feyre's life, but then also, you know, have their own things. They have their own issues. Like, I would love to see a story from Elaine's perspective, because of the fact that, like, Elaine goes through a lot of stuff, especially in A Court of Wings and Ruin, and you start to see her kind of come around in Frost and Starlight, but she's still got issues to deal with, and I want to see how that develops, especially over Nesta's series, because if I can think of anything that would happen, Elaine would probably end up making a full mental recovery at some point in that series, because she's already starting to be on the mend. But anyway, really liked that a lot. I just didn't love it nearly as much as I did the rest of the books. I think that it definitely did what it needed to. I think that I enjoyed it a lot more than most people did, but it's just not, it's not like anything brand spanking new. If anything, I really wanted it to be longer. I wanted it to be more of a fully fleshed out novel as opposed to just a novella, but I only got what I got, so it's fine. But from there, I decided to pick up my next Wheel of D20 book, which is Descender Volume 2 Machine Moon by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen. This is the second book in a graphic novel series dedicated to a sci-fi futuristic world, where basically in the first volume we learned that, you know, robots had kind of been like, not necessarily servants, but they were a very well established part of life. Androids were like a huge thing. And we, at this point in the future, had been also involved with other planets and universes and stuff. And there's this whole big war that goes on, basically. And in that war, the androids are the ones that are blamed for the start of it, because there's like a lot of mass murders, there's entire planets that are just eradicated, and the androids are the ones that are blamed for it. And so all of the planets decide to get rid of their android and other AI companions and things of that nature, because for many of them, AIs were created for their kids. Like, there were some kids, like our main characters, who had, like, you know, robots that they grew up with. And so then we fast forward about 10 years later, you find out that one of those androids that was a child android was kind of frozen away in time for about 10 years, and nobody found him. And then he wakes up out of this freezing, or basically this shutdown mode that he was in, essentially, and he finds out that his brother, who is the human that basically he was assigned to be the companion of, is gone, as well as his brother's mother, and, you know, everybody seems to be gone. There's so many things that are missing, and he doesn't know where he is, he doesn't know what's been going on. And then it turns out that when he woke up, it sent off this signal to all of these different groups of people who are now after him, either to kill him because of the fact that he is a remaining android, or because they want to use him for some specific purpose. And you find out at the very, very beginning, like the first chapter of this second volume, that there is another character that we will be following the perspective of, who turns out to be Andy, the brother that Tim-21, the android, has been looking for. And it turns out that Andy has been searching for Tim-21, but thought him dead for the longest time because of the android killings that had gone on. And so it looks like we're going to see a lot more of that story. Like, and that's a story I love, is when you have two characters who are siblings, or are, you know, in some capacity connected, and they get separated, and the journey is them coming back to each other. I love that kind of storytelling. It is so heartwarming and sometimes heartbreaking, but really well done. So basically we're just following, you know, more of the story. Tim-21's been picked up by a group that claims to want to help him, claims that they want to essentially save him from all these killers, and they're basically a band of other androids and robots and such. And so Tim-21, though, is more focused, though, on figuring out where his brother is. And so he was going to join up with this team that basically was going to link him back up with the person who created him initially, whose name is Quan, and Quan has his own like backstory too. You learn in the first volume that he is looked at as like one of the worst people in the entire galaxies because of the fact that he created a lot of the androids that there were in this world, and so he kind of is being discredited because of the fact that all these androids supposedly, you know, were bad, and so like he was a bad person for making them, all these things. But Quan is basically the one that created Tim 21 and was able to find him to then place him under the control of the UCG, or the United something. It's basically a government organization of some kind. I am excited to read this. This is to complete my third prompt for Wheel of D20, which was to read a graphic novel, and it is completing the final prompt that I had received from Stephanie's Bookverse's Star Hop TBR game. So after this one is done, I will only need to do the 2 wheel spin prompts I had got for Wheel of D20, which is very exciting. I'll already have, within the first week of the month, got through 3 of my 5 prompts I needed to for Wheel of D20. But I'm going to read the entirety of this before Robert and I do some date night stuff, because it is date night tonight, and I think I'm just going to enjoy this. I gave the first volume a 5 out of 5 stars because I really loved the way it set up everything very, very well. I don't think this is going to necessarily hit a 5-star, because usually the middling volumes in graphic novel series for me don't live up to like that first, you know, installment, because of the fact that the first one really has to make a splash for me in terms of me wanting to read the rest of the series. So I think that this though will at least get maybe a 3-star. I can say probably a 3 or a 4-star because I already enjoy the story. I think for me right now it's going to be seeing how is it that the plot lines are going to start coming together, especially now that we have Andy as an established character in this, because I thought that he was dead over the course of the first volume, but turns out he's not. And so we are going to figure out, how does Andy start figuring out how to find Tim 21. So okay, so a little bit later, probably like maybe an hour, finished Sender Volume 2, gave it 4 stars, so now I have 3 prompts out of the 5 done for my Wheel of D20 for this month, which is super exciting. Anyway, really liked this one. Like I said, we really got a lot more of Andy. We got to see a lot of him and like him on his journey trying to find Tim 21. And Tim 21 is taken to what's called the Machine Moon. It's basically the hub of the robot resistance that has been going on, that has been in hiding for a while, since at least the Harvester War had broken out, which the Harvesters were like a kind of AI that basically had gone rogue in a sense, where like they wanted to kill all of the life form that there was, human and otherwise. So they basically were a group of people who were seeking out to kill a lot of the life forms that there were. And we start to learn more about what the Resistance is looking for, what they want Tim for specifically. And yeah, a couple other things with that. There was a very big thing that happened like right at the end of this. Very happy with this one. I think it definitely works as a secondary part of the story, but again, you know, it's not a 5-star because there are some things that I still don't quite understand. There's a whole thing political-wise that I'm not still really understanding too much, but we're starting to get more things as time goes on. That's gonna be it for me for right now, and I will update you guys when I get to my next Wheel of D20 book, but that won't be for a little bit. But either way, I'll update you guys again once we get to the next book for my Wheel of D20 books. Hey guys, so it is quite a few days later. I took a break from some of the Wheel of D20 books because I had some other things I needed to get through in the month, but I will be starting my next Wheel of D20 read today on August 18th, and that is The Hating Game. The Hating Game is completing my reread prompt that I picked for the Wheel of D20. This is one of the only 2 that were not picked from Stephanie's Bookverse TBR game, and so I wanted to get this one done kind of fairly quickly. It's a very fast read. This is the 3rd time I'm reading it, so I'll basically be relying on the audiobook and just cranking through this. Reading schedule, I'll be getting this done by about the 21st, which is I think Sunday, so I'm not gonna rush this. I'm just gonna enjoy my time because this is one of my most favorite romances. It's actually the first romance that I read where I was like, this is exactly what I love. This is what I want. And I particularly relate to Lucy a lot because Lucy actually in the story has the job that I wish I kind of had when I was going for being an editor and stuff with my career. But if you don't know what The Hating Game is, it is a romance. It is a hate-to-love romance involving two characters, Joshua Templeman over here and Lucy Hutton, who are basically rivals. They are fighting for the same job, and so Lucy is hell-bent on beating Joshua because he gets under her skin so much, and there's a lot of reasons as to why. A lot of it is her own insecurities and the fact that she secretly kind of like got a thing for him but doesn't want to admit it. And you learn very quickly that Joshua also kind of has that. Again, this is my third time reading it. I love this book so much. This has definitely become a very easy comfort read. I think I would use this as a lot of times a palate cleanser if I really needed it, but I don't typically get too burned out on too many kinds of books. I don't think I read a lot of the same stuff all the time anymore. Like, I feel that my reading has become very varied, and so this though, when I just feel like I need a nice comfort read, this is definitely one I gravitate toward. Today I'm only going to be reading like the first 2 chapters of this to meet my reading goal for the day, and then I'll be transitioning to something else that I talk about in my weekly vlog that I was doing this current week. But I'm gonna get started with this, and I don't really know if I'm gonna update you guys much on this until I get done with it, because honestly, I've said all I can say about it. I love this. I've given it 5 out of 5 stars both times that I've read it. So not much is really going to change in terms of my opinion unless something like really profound that I'm reminded of comes up. But otherwise, I probably will just wait to update you guys until I finish this and start going into the next and final book for my Wheel of D20 reads. So I'll check in with you guys at some point. Hey guys, so it is now just after 5 o'clock in the evening on Sunday, August 21st, and I have finished The Hating Game today. I, once again, rated this 5 out of 5 stars, absolutely loved it. This is the 3rd time I've read this, so it's not a shock, but I always find it so refreshing still every time I reread this. Just like the amount of love I feel out of this book, it's definitely like a reread for a reason. It's something that always brings me so much joy, and I feel like every time I reread this too, I just find myself connecting so much more and more to Lucy, because like honestly, Lucy and I have a lot in common in terms of our mental health, how we typically act in, you know, scenarios with other people, especially working in like a corporate setting. And then on top of it, I feel like the way that she and Josh have their relationship is one that, like, I totally understand. Like, I feel for Lucy and the fear that there is with kind of letting herself admit that she may have a thing for her coworker, because if I was in her situation, I definitely would feel the same way based on my own mental health patterns and the things that happen to me and my anxiety, and the fact that Lucy and I just have a lot of things in common. I always forget that this has an epilogue that like takes place quite a bit of time after the end of the book, and it always like is so sweet to like go back and reread that epilogue, because it's the audiobook I have through Scribd does not include the epilogue. So I always forget that it's there, and then I read it again and I'm just like floored and blown away by like how exactly Sally decided to end off their story and let people know like kind of what had happened. Because like that's the whole point of the epilogue, is it's kind of something that after some time, you know, you get to see kind of where they are, what they're doing, that kind of thing, without, you know, then leading into the idea of like a second book of any kind. And so I love this so much. This thing brings me so much joy and happiness. Like every time I read it, it just gives me the warm fuzzies all the time and makes me very appreciative of love and romance. This was to complete the Wheel of D20 pick for a reread, and so now I am already done for the day with my reading goal for the next book, which is As Old as Time by Liz Braswell. This is technically the 3rd book in the Twisted Tales series, but they all are standalones, so you really don't have to read them in any particular order. I don't know whether or not they do make cameos to other stories in the Twisted Tales. I genuinely have no idea. This is the first one I'm going into, but this was to read a book that was read for the Wheel of D20. Now, this also is counting for a couple other things for readathons and stuff like that, as well as the hating game, but this is the last book I need to finish for the Wheel of D20. So I do believe I am going to complete the Wheel of D20 for the month of August, which is very exciting. I'm going to hold off on doing any of like the wheel spins and stuff like that though until later this week when I go to finish this. But I have read the first 33 pages of this, which already has very interesting vibes about it, because the beginning of this, we learn about, first of all, how exactly the curse is brought onto the beast, just like it is in the Disney movie. But then we also see that there is a prisoner in a castle, I'm assuming in the beast's castle, and we don't know who it is. I am willing to believe it is Belle's mother, because the tagline for this is, "What if Belle's mother cursed the beast?" And this is kind of like the idea of the Twisted Tales, is that it takes the Disney story and it changes it up a little bit to kind of see almost like a what if scenario. Well, actually it is a what if scenario, but this one in particular, we're focusing on the idea that Belle's mother was the enchantress that placed the curse on the beast in the first place. And what we also see in this is kind of the lead up to Belle's birth and how Maurice, Belle's father, and her mother had ended up meeting, which in this story we find out Maurice basically met her after moving to town and was like infatuated with her. And I think from here we're going to start understanding what exactly led up to Rosalind then placing the curse on the beast and what happened to her after that. But then interspersed with this, we're getting Belle as, you know, time's going on. The only chapter we've seen of her so far was a very short one where she's at the bookstore talking to the bookseller, and basically, like, we learned that, you know, most people don't really seem to know how to interact with her because she's different. She is a girl that, you know, reads books as opposed to doing everything else the other women in town do, which is like be housewives and stuff like that. And they've already mentioned whether or not she's accepted Gaston's proposal and all that stuff too. So it is going to be very obviously in line with what we know of the Disney story, and it is part of the Disney, like, I think Hyperion maybe? Yeah, Disney Hyperion line. So it's going to have like all the references that we would know from Disney. But this is, like I said, taking things on its head, where we're going to see what involving Belle's mother in the story more so will do in terms of like, how does Liz Braswell determine what exactly would happen if that's the case. But yeah, that's pretty much all I can tell you. The synopsis doesn't really seem to be that different. The only difference is that basically, from what the synopsis in the back of the book says, is that when Belle is captured by the beast, she does find the rose, and when she touches it, that's when she learns about exactly what happened to her mother, what basically in the last 21 years has happened that basically has led things to be how they are now, where she is trapped by the beast, and you know, we see, you know, her supposed to going to fall in love with him kind of thing. So that's pretty much all I can say about this, but so far not too bad. But that's all I needed to read for today, because I had to finish the last like almost 100 pages of the hating game and then move on to this. So I'm going to be moving on to a different book for the rest of the day. So I'll pick this up more over the course of the week, and if I have any more thoughts on this before I finish it, I'll let you know. But I am supposed to finish this up this coming week. Thursday is when I'm supposed to have this finished, reading the last 47 pages on Thursday. So if any time between now and then I do have any extra thoughts on it, which I think I will, considering, you know, especially seeing how things play out, I may have some thoughts on it. I will let you know. Otherwise, I may hold off until I finish it. It will really depend on what I feel like I need to say, things like that. But hey guys, so it is now about 9:40 almost in the morning on Tuesday, August 23rd. I am, I think, almost 200 pages. I'm like 198 pages into As Old as Time, and I want to give some thoughts on this because I'm now getting into part 2, and this is interesting. So like I said before, we really focus on not just the actual story that we know from the Disney cartoon, and even in some cases from the fairy tale that, you know, was inspired the Disney cartoon. But this book also does, like I said before too, a lot of contextual building of, like, specifically Belle's father and how he met her mother, who we know from the synopsis is the enchantress that did put the curse on the beast. And by the end of part 1, we learn what exactly led up to the curse being placed on the beast in general, not just when she goes to the castle, like you learn about in the very beginning, and how, you know, she cursed him for being a really mean person at the age of 11, because he's a freaking kid. And you also learn, like, there's a lot of other things that kind of led up to that. There was, like, a lot of build up in terms of understanding what was happening in the world, which also I think plays a little bit into what we learn about in Beauty and the Beast, the live action film that there was with Emma Watson. I don't know whether or not the reason why we don't see Belle's mother after the curse is placed on the beast is the same reason as to what is in the live action movie. Which if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to say it here because I don't want to spoil it for those of you, but for those of you that have watched the live action movie and you know what we know about Belle's mother, I don't know at this point whether or not they have kind of pulled from that, because this was released in 2016. The live action came out in 2017. So apparently this came out before that, so I don't know if it's going to line up at all with what the live action movie did, but I would be interested to see, because at this point Belle finds the rose and she finds out that her mother is the one that is the enchantress that had placed the curse on the beast, and she learns about the curse itself, basically. That's like the very end of part 1. And then part 2 starts off where she leaves the castle, is surrounded by the wolves, the beast saves her, and they go back to the castle and she helps take care of him, all these things. And they start talking, and essentially she learns about what the mirror does, and they go to see if they can find the enchantress, and it just is completely gray. And the beast says that has never happened before, so that leads me to believe either the enchantress is still alive and is hiding, or very recently she may have passed. We don't know. And so basically this is really good for those of you that are fans of like the Disney cartoon, the live action movie, because it does follow very sequentially what's going on, but there's a lot more context that's involved in terms of the reasons behind why the enchantress cursed the beast, why, you know, Maurice is the way he is, why he is so protective of Belle, and also as to why the mother is never really mentioned while Belle is young, and why she becomes so concerned and infatuated with finding out more about her mother. So at this point, it's going pretty well. It's not, I think, the most enticing of things, and I don't know whether that's because I know the story from back and center, or if it's because the writing is not super engaging. I think it's more so that the writing is not very engaging for me. It's kind of at a 3-star at this point, but I really do appreciate the context building. I think that that is the best part of this because, like I said, it really just kind of fleshes out the story a little bit more, and it actually makes sense. If you were to, like, obviously, like I said, take this as it is and think that this is the reason why the beast is the way he is, as opposed to, you know, it being just a random person that was the enchantress, if you will. So I really like that the logic here actually is pretty sound. I like that it makes sense for this story to go this way, and it doesn't stray too far from what we know of the actual story of Beauty and the Beast. I will be disappointed if ultimately things do change by the end of it, because I would prefer this to kind of be similar to what we would know of the cartoon and the live action and everything, but having like that little bit of spice added to it, if you will, with the fact that we know who the enchantress is as opposed to it being a random person, if you will. But also, like I said, building the context of the world at the time that the enchantress was around and before she cursed the beast is very important, because there's a whole thing with it too where you learn that in this world, people like the enchantress, who's named Rosalind, you've learned that she and other magical involved people called Les Chamois, which is a French word that I'm going to translate for you through Google Translate. It's not going to be the best translation of it, but it means, Charmant means lovely, so they're kind of like the charmers. They can basically like use their magic to, in a sense, not like manipulate people, but they're seen as, you know, much more ethereal, much more lovely, much more endearing kind of thing. And people in this town, placed in France, naturally, because the story is originally French. If you're not aware, the original story of Beauty and the Beast is a French story called La Belle and la Bête, I believe. La Belle and la Bête, I think that's how it's said. This town in France, they basically are trying to eradicate, in some ways, the Les Charmants, because many of the townspeople think that they are bad for the town, that they are more harm than good, and it's kind of like they're trying to ostracize them from this town. It's a kind of racism in a sense, because I don't know whether you would consider the Les Charmants to be a type of race or species or whatever, but there is some kind of othering factor within this that is very important in terms of, like I said, building the context of the story, because it does play into a lot of the reason why the Beast is being looked at as kind of this evil person, even though at the age of 11 he didn't know any better what was going on. And I will say though too that you learn a little bit more about the fact that the Enchantress may have actually been throwing her stones in the wrong path, if you will, where like because she was focusing so much on the child and punishing him for the things that kind of happened, it's more prevalent in this book that that probably wasn't the best of scenarios, because again, the Beast was 11 years old, a spoiled kid who didn't know any better because his parents were gone, you know, by the time he came into power. So it's not a surprise that he would be kind of a spoiled brat. But I don't know, there's a lot of things about this that I really seem to like, but I don't think that the writing is super engaging. And I don't really know if it's going to continue that way. I think at this point it's kind of a 3-star because I like a lot of it. But again, I'm just not as enthralled with it as I would like to be. And I think that as the story goes on, we get maybe a little bit more context of things. I hope we will learn more about that. But at this point in part 2, I don't know if we're going to get much more of the backstory, because up until the curse is brought upon with the Beast, we were looking at the context of the story and looking at Rosalind and Maurice and, you know, how they were doing and what they were doing when Rosalind went to go curse the Beast. But I don't think at this point we're going to see much more of that background context until Belle starts digging more into her mother's past. So we probably, for a good chunk of this now, almost 200 pages in, about 40% of the way through, we probably will spend a good chunk of the middle here not really seeing much other than Belle digging up the history of her mother, and then we will get more context. So there's probably going to be a little bit of a slowness involved in this, because it's going to be regurgitating what we know of the cartoon and of the movie and things like that. So that is basically all I can say about this one. But so far it's pretty okay. I think I'll update again once I reach a point where there's new things that are happening, or at the very least by the time I finish it. Hello everybody, it is just after 11 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, August 24th. I'm taking a break from work after having done quite a bit of work this morning, and I've been listening to more of, obviously, As Old as Time, since this is for the Wheel of D20, but I just got to part 3, and I need to talk about a few things. So, first of which being that this whole second part has actually been the most that we've seen in terms of the actual twists that are involved in this, that make this the twisted tale. Basically, what we learn is after Belle finds out about the fact that her mother was the one that placed the curse on the Beast and on the castle itself and all the servants, the whole twist really is then about finding out why she placed the curse on the castle and finding out some very dark and mysterious things about things that kind of led up to that. So I am very happy to say that this is actually becoming very interesting the more it goes on. But it is a very slow book. And I, again, don't know if that's because of the fact that, you know, since I know this story of Beauty and the Beast, that, you know, it's making it feel like it's dragging on more because I'm very familiar with it. And the mystery aspect is definitely the newest part, but it still feels very similar in vibe to what we know of Beauty and the Beast. There are, like I said, sprinklings of things that we would know from the cartoon and from the movie. And what's interesting is that in this one, they do play on the fact that there is a Mr. Potts, which we had not really seen anything of until the movie that was made with Emma Watson in it. And like I said before, this was published before that movie was released. So I don't know if these were supposed to be working in tandem in some kind, but I will say that things about Mr. Potts are slightly different in this one than they were in the movie. And I'm not going to say how because I don't want to spoil it. I feel that this more so takes like turns as opposed to full-on twists, because what is incorporated as the twist of the story logically makes sense. It honestly feels very natural to have this twist be part of the story. So I don't really know whether or not I would say that I'm floored by this, because this is something that if I was to have written this, I feel like it would have gone the exact same way. Like, I feel that this is a pretty normal twist that most people would think of when it comes to Beauty and the Beast, and adding in the idea that, you know, the Enchantress is Belle's mom. I don't know if that, though I would say this is also predictable by any means, because there are some things that I'm not, you know, expecting in terms of like how the story's going, but I think the general twist and what is being revealed makes sense, but it's not predictable at the same time. It's very weird. I can't quite explain it, but I am enjoying this. I think it is kind of more of a lower 4-star at this point, as opposed to being a complete 3-star. Just because I think that in general it is a little slow. Things are kind of, you know, understandably predictable in the sense that like I said, you know, when you see things come up, you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, the logic is really there, which I appreciate. I appreciate that Liz Braswell didn't really take things too far, didn't make things too outside of the norm of what we know of the story. And obviously, like I said, we have scenes that are very, you know, memorable from the cartoon and from the movie. At the point of the story that we would know from the cartoon, we know that Maurice right now has just been taken away to the asylum, which is interesting because in the cartoon, at the very least, Belle is kind of who helps her father with escaping from the asylum, but in the cartoon at the same time, we also see her before Gaston and everybody takes her father to the asylum, and we haven't reached that. If anything, she doesn't even know that her father is struggling. If anything, in this one, they do find out that he might be sick when he's on his way back to the town. Because this takes place over the course of like a couple of days, whereas the cartoon made it feel like it was much longer. I don't know why, it just did. And I'm shocked in the sense that I like kind of enjoy that aspect, like the fact that this is taking over a shorter period of time, and that Belle right now doesn't know what's going on with her dad because she's more focused on the mystery, trying to solve the curse and figure out what to do with it, because like in the cartoon it didn't seem like she really cared all that much, and it was not until the very end that she even really fully kind of came to the conclusion of, oh my gosh, I solved the curse, you know. Like, it's interesting that this kind of takes the curse more seriously, and Belle is not really as, you know, not necessarily interested in what her father's doing, but she's not as, I don't know, like, obsessed with what's going on with her father, where she has to, like, go. She does end up leaving the castle at this point, but for a very different reason than why she does in the cartoon. That's all I'll say. I'm on page 365 right now, and I need to get to page 438, so I'm like a little more than 70 pages from the end of this, and I'm going to be listening to this more on my lunch break here soon. I just got an email, though, about something I need to check in on for work, so I gotta go for right now, but I will update you guys more probably tomorrow when I finish this, because I think this is the last part of the story. Like, the rest of this is going to be like the ending of this. So I think I'll come back tomorrow and let you guys know what my final thoughts are on it, because I will be... Hey guys, so it is about 10:30 in the morning right now. I'm coming off of my break here from work, and I just finished As Old as Time by Liz Braswell. I think I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5 stars because overall I really did enjoy it. And I will say that the third part of this is where a lot of the twisting comes in. Because like I said before, there was some kind of twist involved of the fact that we find out that obviously Belle's mother is the one who's the Enchantress. But there's even more twists that come up in the third part in relation to that, and because of the fact that we have this twist. Ultimately, the ending of this is not at all what I had expected. It ends very, very differently than Beauty and the Beast, which is very exciting. I think I may have said earlier that I would like it if it was ending the same way, but I actually really like what happens here, because I don't want to spoil anything exactly, but the way in which specifically the whole, you know, final scene, battle scene, if you will, at the mansion or at the castle, that doesn't happen. And that's all I will say in terms of what happens in this, because I, again, don't want to spoil this, and I want everybody to go and check this out if you're interested. Because like I said, the third part is where really a lot of the differences come into play. Pretty much everything leading up to it, with the exception of learning that Belle's mom is the Enchantress, and kind of the mystery surrounding around why the curse was placed upon him, on the Beast, That all plays kind of subtly over the course of the book, but then you get to part 3 and a lot of things start to actually kind of build up very quickly in terms of other things, other issues that are brought up, and the fact that ultimately the end of this kind of makes it feel like we may have got cameos in other books. And I'm not sure if that's the case, because this is technically the 3rd book in the Twisted Tales series, but as far as I was initially aware, they all could basically act as standalones. But now this is making me feel like we may have cameos of characters in various books, because there even was a very brief and subtle mention of Cinderella. Like, basically Belle was making a comparison to something about, like, basically running out of time. I think it was about the curse, and said something about Cinderella, which I was a little taken aback by, because I'm like, I don't know if she would know who Cinderella is, or if Cinderella was in some way maybe a fairy tale to her, like it was a story told to her or something like that. But Cinderella is another Disney princess, so, and she has, I think, her own story, if I'm not mistaken. I think it might be another Liz Braswell book, or it might be Jen Calanita, I don't know. But I really enjoy this a lot. I do think there are some things I wasn't as big of a fan of. I do think that the writing was a little slow. I feel like I didn't get as gripped by this as I had initially wanted to, but the further I got along with the story, I definitely was more interested. I felt like it was really fun to see these big twists in this 3rd part happen, because there's a lot that I was not expecting to come up in this. And ultimately, like I said, the ending of this ends way, way differently than I had expected. And so I'm very pleasantly surprised by this. But this is definitely on that lower 4-star, like bordering to still be a 3-star, if you will. But I don't know, I liked it enough to where I'm fine with keeping it a 4-star. But I definitely can see why a lot of people would not necessarily think this was anything really that great. At the same time, I do understand if people like don't seem to really care for the series, because it doesn't really seem to have too much of a gripping factor. It's kind of, honestly, I feel like a series that, unless like you're really into the Disney stuff, you might not get as much enjoyment out of. But overall, not too bad. Did kind of enjoy it in some capacity, but this was my final Wheel of D20 prompt, so I have finished the Wheel of D20 for August, which is very exciting, and that means in September I only have to do 4 spins for the wheel for next month's TBR, which I'm very, very excited for. So yeah, that's gonna basically be it for this month's Wheel of D20 vlog. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm pretty sure that all of my books that I read were 4 and 5 stars, which is pretty impressive. I was not expecting that to happen, but I feel like this has been a pretty good month. It's a great way to start off this new round of Wheel of D20 for the end of the year. And yeah, so thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already and you'd like to see more content like this, go ahead and hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all you guys in my next video. Bye guys!